Adam Juckes, one of our team leads at Client Server. Dom, very kind of you to join us. I wonder if you could start by giving us a bit of a rundown on kind of your role at Birda and what it's involved since its inception.
Sure. Okay. So I'm the Chief Technology Officer, which means that I'm responsible for all of the technology. The product itself is an app for birdwatchers, and our mission is to deepen people's connection with the wild world and to get them to spend more time outside, because these things make people healthier and happier. So I guess, my job's in kind of like two parts. I've got the founder part and I've got the CTO part. So the founder part involves leadership and communicating the vision and why, the questions around why to both the team, also external stakeholders, charities, NGOs, binoculars manufacturers, but also investors. And the day job as CTO means that I run the product and engineering teams, and they're the people who make the app.
I mean, I feel like a kind of obvious question is how did you actually get into it? Why Birda?
Okay, so that's it's a good question, because the answer is actually like kind of by accident. So what I do is I specialize in very early stage startups. I'm an engineer. I'm able to code. I can make things, and a service I kind of offer is I go around looking for founders who've identified an interesting market, or have an idea for a product but not quite sure how to take it further from there. And on day zero, I'm like a one-man technology team. I'm the front-end engineer, the back-end engineer, the product designer, the database administrator, all of these things. And so I go and build some prototypes, and with those prototypes we go and get some investment, and with that investment I go and hire some people, which is where you guys come in, and then they start building the things. And basically over time I sort of fire myself from all of these different roles, and the eventual end game for me is I spend all my time telling people what a great job they're doing, but also they really need to take that annual leave. It's kind of like the end state for a CTO. So I met John and Natalie, the other founders, whilst COVID was very much a thing. So going into this conversation, they said to me, "Hey Dom, we want to do a bird watching app." So for context, I'm an outdoors person. I like walking my dog. I like riding my bike. I'm interested in wildlife and nature. Like if I see something kind of like weird, I'll go and like Google it when I get home and try and figure out what it was. But I never like go out specifically to observe wildlife. So I knew a little bit, but not a great deal. My first question was, my first thought rather was, this sounds wonderful. Like bird watching seems like such a healthy, wholesome outdoor activity. And bearing in mind this is when the pandemic was really bad, it seemed like the kind of thing everyone needed a lot more of. Like my second thought was, how on earth is this a business? How is this going to work commercially? And I think quite a lot of people I speak to, and when they ask me what I'm up to, they'll say I'm building a bird watching app. That's their first question. It's like, how is this a business? Well, it turns out that bird watchers spend about the same amount of money on their hobby as golfers do.
Really?
It's a lot more mainstream than a lot of people realize. So like one thing I noticed, if I was going to this is later on after the pandemic, if I was going to a party and I met a load of new people and you ask them what they were doing during the week or at the last weekend, if they're training for a triathlon, they will tell you immediately. They'll say, I'm training for my triathlon. If they're into amateur dramatics, they'll tell you that they're rehearsing their play. If they're a bird watcher, they'll just tell you that they went for a walk. And it's only if you say, oh, I was actually out bird watching, that they come back and say, oh, I was out bird watching with my dad. It's something we've done every month since I was 10. It's a much broader hobby than we realized. I met some founders that identified an interesting market, and it seemed like the kind of thing the world needed more of. And being a technologist, I could see lots of ways that different bits of technology could be applied to bird watching that hadn't really before. In particular, social features and gamification, things that have worked really well in other hobbies. So Strava is a very successful app for cyclists. You've also got things like Fitbit on the more casual side. So we kind of thought maybe we can build a gamified activity tracker for bird watchers.
Wow. Amazing. And I'm conscious you said you're a one-man technical shop at the start where you're doing everything.
Yes.
How do you go about deciding what your tech stack is and choosing the technology around it, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about what Birda's tech stack is specifically.
So because it's a one-man band, it's whatever I find easy to use, and throughout my so in my background as an engineer has been in front-end JavaScript, so rich web applications in React.js, and quite quickly they turned into full-stack applications with Node.js and React on the front end and other React Native front ends. So I just do that because I know it really well, and there isn't really much that you can't do. Well, it's TypeScript these days rather than JavaScript, but with that tech stack, there's not really much that you can't do. It also makes a lot of sense from a strategic point of view, because even after we've raised some money and I've hired a small team, the amount of resources that I have are still extremely scarce. So by having a unified tech stack from front end and back end, it means that I can hire full stack engineers and everybody can do a little bit of everything, which means that my tech budget goes a lot further.
That makes sense. And how does that evolve? Like as you hire people with their input into tech, I mean, how do you sort of indoctrinate them to your way of thinking every time, or how do they?
No. So I find that this sort of thing seems to sort of sort itself out. So it's just like somewhere where we are at already. So you get different sorts of people within a tech team, and I think like one useful axis is that some people are more happy with uncertainty than others. So for example, if you're doing front end work, no design survives contact with real data and the real app environment or the real browser environment. There's always lots of changes and tweaks that need to be made. Some sorts of engineers love that. As soon as stuff starts getting weird, they love figuring out creative solutions and working with the design team to iterate. Other engineers like to have it all designed perfectly up front, and that kind of mode of thinking suits back-end engineering much more than front-end engineering. So over time, you find that some people gravitate to either end of the stack, but that's okay, because as time goes on, those specialisms start to emerge. So I'll be having conversations with my team, and one of them will say, "Hey Dom, I really don't want to be doing this front end stuff anymore. Like just figuring out how to center a button isn't what I want to do with my life. Can I do more database things?" And that's fine. So I go and hire more front end people. That's the specialism tends to emerge over time. But even then, having everybody broadly having some degree of full stack skills is really useful, because a lot of the time, if you've got a front end engineer that just needs a tiny little back end task, it's just easier for them to go and do it if it's small and have it reviewed by a back end specialist.
Yeah. You mentioned that you're obviously an early stage startup specialist. It's now been 3 years, 2.5, 3 years. So, I mean, what's still keeping you interested, or is this is this still early stage in your eyes?
Oh, this is still very early stage. I mean, the team is still very, very small. We still have lots of stuff that just isn't really built, but it's also true that I'm spending far less of my time doing coding these days, and to be honest, that's a good thing. Like being the one-man band tech team is not healthy or sustainable, particularly wearing the co-founder hat as well. It's very, very tiring to be doing high-level strategic stuff and then jumping straight into the code base and doing very, very detailed things. That's something that I can do, but it's very, very tiring, and it's kind of like inefficient in terms of like your mental energy. So these days I'm doing more of the strategy, more of the answering why, and doing much less of the coding, and that's an awful lot healthier. It means I do a lot less context switching. I still do bits and pieces every now and again. So there's some tasks that I call code gardening. And this is like really silly, trivial, basic things that the rest of the engineering team find really, really boring. But actually, it's kind of like a nice relaxing break for me, doing a little bit of refactoring, a little bit of tidying, but it means I can stay in contact with the code base, but also have like something else to do. Other things that I tend to be doing is more sort of where the product and the engineering teams interact. So there'll be features on the roadmap. It won't be entirely clear how those are going to be solved technologically, but because I understand both the product stuff and the engineering stuff, I can kind of like prototype things and figure out like the broad scale of what we can do, what we can achieve, how quickly it can be achieved, and ensure that the product and engineering teams are working in sympathy, because I can prevent the product team from asking the engineering team for something that can't be delivered, and I can prevent the engineering team from going down too many dead end rabbit holes.
So, I mean,
sorry, John, you go.
As an early stage, then, I mean, in terms of as you begin to bring in those additional people to take responsibilities away from you, I mean, where's, I guess, from a sort of from a growth perspective, where are the biggest challenges in that? Because obviously, you know the way that you've done things. How do you then make sure that you're finding the right people that can implement that in a way that is actually going to follow that same vision?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is you can't be too precious about that vision. Like, the engineering team are doing things quite differently to perhaps how I would do them, but like, that's their job, not my job. And I'm not doing my job effectively if I'm micromanaging that kind of detail. It's also really important to understand that people need to make their own mistakes sometimes. And it's very, very tempting to be on everything to prevent any of those mistakes from happening. Whereas actually you need to let people make their own mistakes, and it's only the really big ones that you want to be avoiding, and you tend to see those from much further away. In terms of the challenges of scaling the team, I think the difficulty is hiring really good senior people. That's the really difficult bit. It's much easier for me to back out if I know that there's other senior people in the mix. And in terms of the people that I like to hire and the budget that I've got, it's very, very difficult because a lot of the people that I'd like to be delegating senior tasks to are working in finance or in big tech on the kinds of salaries that I just can't compete with. Whereas people at towards the beginning of their careers tend to be much more excited about these early stage startup stuff. But you need that seniority in the mix as well, and finding those folks can be really difficult.
And sort of actually was part of my question, which Adam just asked you as well, is like with those hires and stuff, I feel like as a business, it's obviously, you know, it was born out of a passion and someone's hobby. Like, do you find that the people you end up hiring have an interest in outdoors and birding and wildlife, or is it a wider spectrum? How does that work?
So pretty much every single member of the team at least owns a good pair of outdoor shoes, is how I'd put it. But I don't think Adam would be too impressed if I said, Adam, all of these hires have to be bird watchers. I think, I mean, you've got to be realistic about this stuff. I think also, like, our mission is to broaden the scope of bird watching. So new blood is super useful for that. What we do, though, is as part of our onboarding pack, includes a bird book and a pair of binoculars, and we find that people do actually go and use them. In terms of the engineering team in particular, they tend to be creative people who love gadgets. So the photography tends to be quite a good jumping off point for those folks as well. We've got a few different cameras that are owned by the company. So they get loaned out to various different people.
Okay. So I mean, with tying that into what you were talking about, the challenges of hiring, or like, what are kind of the challenges? What are the next steps for Birda? What do you see coming up?
So for startups like Birda, it's very cyclical around fundraising. It's pretty straightforward. We raise some money, and the amount of money that we raise is determined by how we want to go about scaling the team. So we've recently completed a fundraising round and also completed a hiring round. So probably for the next 2 years, we're not going to be doing a huge amount. It's also true that we've been going for 3 years now, and our first hires are coming up for 2 years. And so whilst I work very hard to keep the people that I have hired, it's also true that, like, churn is going to be a thing. It happens. So I need to be prepared for that, as well as to, make sure that I'm not complacent about that. It's very easy after you've kind of like completed a hiring round to think that that's like hiring done, but actually no, the retention is still very much a thing, and you can't let that slip, particularly as whilst you're hiring, like, almost all of your HR mental capacity is going on those new hires, and it's quite easy to neglect your existing team. So it's really important that after a hiring round has finished, to redouble your efforts on retention.
Funny enough, actually, I think we have a Monday morning catch up as leads, and one of the biggest things for me is like making sure about retention and looking after your current staff. I think a big error businesses make is they look ahead and they look to hiring and they forget who they've got and how they keep them interested in the business, which tends to be, they're the most important people. So
indeed.
And with it sort of led us into a bit of a segue with when finding people, kind of our relationship and what led you to using client server. I know you've probably used a lot of recruitment companies, being a specialist startup man.
Yes.
I suppose, first of all, how did you end up finding us, or us finding you?
Instagram, would you believe it? So one of our marketing team found Adam on Instagram. I think you reached out to her, didn't you, Adam? So
Yeah, I did.
Hey, what's the
I remember
thing
seeing. Yeah, I remember seeing you posting, or your marketing team posting something about whether anybody knew somebody that was a UI or UX designer, and I think my very quick response was, I'm not one, but I can definitely find you one.
There we go. Always be hustling, eh?
The powers of social media.
Mm. Yeah. So
yeah, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, so that's how we came across client server. So generally speaking, I usually work with a number of different agencies, not out of choice. It's much easier if I only have to deal with one, to be honest. But it's unusual for me to get what I need from one agency. So it's been nice not to have to bother this time around.
And what I suppose the big thing for us is obviously the experience and the relationship we form. And I think obviously Adam, Adam was drawn to you guys because I know it's his passion, birding and wildlife as well. But how have you kind of found that experience with us? I suppose what have you, from your experience of recruiters, how have we differed? What have you found helpful from us?
Yeah, so the main thing that I'm looking for an agency is just to save me a lot of time. I'm an engineer. I can build anything except time. That's the only thing I can't make. Pretty much anything else I can come up with, but time I can't make. So people who save me time become very, very popular. And recruitment is very, very time consuming. Typically, I have to review squillions of CVs, and the vast majority of them are complete no-hopers. I've got very, very high standards for my teams. I like my teams to be as small as possible. I'm always bemused when I meet folks from like big tech who like boast about how big their teams are. I just think that just sounds like a nightmare. I really don't want that. So I like to hire fewer people but pay a bit more. I think it's cheaper overall, particularly once you factor in the management overhead and the levels of motivation. I don't want to be spending my time reviewing CVs, and I don't want to be wasting. So cultural fit is obviously very, very important for high-performing teams. So I do a phone screen with everybody, and it's in the past, I've always been amazed about how many people can't keep it together for a 15-minute conversation without slagging off a previous employer or some such other cultural fit red flag. So people who save me time from reviewing no-hoper CVs or phone screening candidates who are never going to be a cultural fit, it's extremely valuable for me.
I'm gonna caveat that I'm hoping we don't send you the no-hoper CVs. They're
you've never sent. I've never received a single no-hoper CV. I've received some that weren't quite right, but I'd always rather have seen those ones. Honestly, the ones that aren't quite right helps me firm up what I'm looking for as well. Sometimes you need to see what you don't want to understand what you do. But I've never received anything that was a waste of my time.
And I think that actually flips round as well, because I think in that sort of relationship, and when you're a recruitment consultancy partnering with a client, the two-way feedback channel is exactly that, because you see things that may lead you in a direction, make you understand more about what you do and don't want. But our ability to be relatively agile with that feedback then means that like you say, time is. It's one thing you can't make, but it's also one thing that people don't necessarily put quite enough value on.
Yes. It's something I say to a lot of people that I mentor, particularly people who are new to management. Is like, you need to value your time at £1,000 an hour. Like when you're making decisions about how you spend it, you should treat it that seriously, because the cost actually is probably more. But that's the way you need to think about how you allocate your time.
It's interesting because actually I think it goes in cycles, but sort of using external recruiters is sort of traditionally unpopular, and then it becomes popular, and it's kind of like a necessary evil. And it's refreshing to hear someone that you want, if you can form that close relationship, especially with a recruitment partner you can trust and understands you. I think it does give you that time back, and it does provides that value.
The other big time sink in recruitment is actually going and dealing with all. I mean, my phone's constantly ringing with recruiters trying to get business from me, and I just block all of them. But if I'm not getting the CV pipeline that I need, I'm now having to spend time speaking to all of those guys. And that's another great waste of my time. I really just would rather not.
Well, hopefully that's where we add a bit of value. Look, I know we've had you for a little while, so I really appreciate the time. Maybe
no trouble.
Just as like a last hook for people, especially with hirers for Birda, is like, in terms of exciting opportunities coming up for Birda, what exciting stuff have you got on the horizon that hopefully will require all of our attention and yours for the best hires? But what exciting stuff's coming up?
So the most exciting stuff that's coming up is going to be scaling. We're growing rapidly. So we're now getting into more sophisticated computer science, data structures, algorithms, the kind of thing that doesn't really matter when you've got a few thousand users, but when you've got hundreds of thousands, it does. So scaling is always fun and it's always interesting. And we're also working really hard on new AI features, both generative AI and standard classical ML as well. So yeah, I might be in the market for a data scientist in the nearish future.
I feel like we could go down a rabbit warren if we started talking about AI and the sort of impact that's going to have. But
yes, yeah, it's been entertaining for our hiring process, that's for sure. All of
I can imagine.
Chat GPT submitted tech tests.
Yeah,
Yes, exactly.
That's another conversation.
Yeah, I feel like there's a whole other podcast in that, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to have a chat with us and joining us.
No trouble.
And hopefully we'll be here to support you on any of the hiring you have going forward.
Very good. All right.
Fantastic.
Thanks ever so much. Cheers, Dom.
Take it easy. And if hopefully everyone can join us on our next episode of Talking Tech.